Hello, dear art friends. It's nice that you've tuned in again, and I welcome you to the second episode of the series, What Does It Actually Mean? Here, I will explain art-related keywords with Dr. Rainer Vollkommer. That one has heard many times, but perhaps
has not really realized that one does not exactly know what it actually means.
Today we are talking about the concept of the art market. Although I myself come from the art market, I am an art dealer, but nevertheless, I would like to ask Dr. Rainer Vollkommer to explain the term to you. What all is included in the art market? What influences it? How do these sometimes outrageous prices arise in multiple digits? Millions? Here you'll find answers, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the podcast if you enjoyed it.
How does the art scene tick? Everything we always wanted to know about art. A podcast by and with Petra Lawson.
Hello, Dr. Rainer Vollkommer.
Yes, hello, Petra Lawson.
Today we are talking about the term art market. What is that?
Yes, that is the market for art in every form, because most artworks have the goal, or the artists, of course, have the goal of being recognized, of becoming famous, but also, of course, wanting to make a living from what they do. And it is just like that there has to be an art market, also automatically one that covers the needs of the artist, but also those of the enthusiast who appreciates such works, then engages with and buys, and as intermediaries, often professional art dealers, then the way to accommodate these diverse wishes. And to cater to that, there are also different ways. There are the gallery, where things are then exhibited and presented and can be bought from the gallery. But there is also the possibility that it is in other exhibitions, which are not in the gallery, but in institutions and others, which are less commercially successful because they are less professional. Then there are, of course, also auctions, so that one can pieces are then put in auctions, and the auction house tries to categorize them if it doesn't already have information from the interested party, the one who wants to sell, and then they reach the public this way. There are, besides, of course, also art agents who have commissions for specific artworks, often for very wealthy people or those who simply don't have the time to search for artworks. Then there's the connoisseurship, the experts who then deal with it. This is often because it really depending on the details that these people then also specialized. So then there are some who are specialized in Flemish painting of the 16th century. Others are specialized in Dutch painting of the 17th century, and others are specialized in Picasso. Others are specialized in other artists. So there are many possibilities, but they are very important because they are the experts who, depending on the case, spend even decades or their whole life, depending on a period, a genre, or an artist.
Okay, and then we have the primary market, and then we have the secondary market. What is that now, and where is the difference?
Yes, the primary market is then the direct encounter, usually often, yes. And the secondary is then what results from it, so to speak, in the second line. And the primary is just that, for example, you enter into a dialogue directly with the artist and also buy things. But that is always more difficult depending on the situation than if ideally so to speak. Every artist had a gallerist, and in the hope that he has a good one who also has a bit of luck, but also very much experience, depending on the person. One is more or less well positioned or not.
Made man, woman, whatever.
Exactly, yes. Well, that's also what we forget. The art market, and of course, what is in everything is naturally that it's about money here too. Even when we talk about artworks, you need just to make an exhibition in a gallery. The gallery also somehow needs to be rented and paid for. So it is always, of course, also about money, and then coincidences come into play. Naturally, the likelihood is high that if you are in the big centers, Real Life Hen can live and also exhibit, that it is more likely that people buy something than if you are, so to speak, in rural areas. Unless you are, of course, famous.
Yes, then one
if you are
can-
famous, then you can be anywhere. You can.
Always like, we need to become famous.
Well, then that's, of course, a different story. And conversely, the gallerist also has an interest naturally in selling, logically, because they also have to make a living from it. But he usually also tries to naturally to acquire art and then sell it, hoping it might increase in value, or has something special.
Yes,
so
yes.
it's not just, it's always this connection, but it's not just about money, but also about many other things that come into play. And that's also very important. And we have to imagine there was already an art market with the Romans. So even the Romans had an art market to acquire Greek statues. And then, so to speak, there was the deep Middle Ages, where it was more commissioned works from the church or from the ruling nobility. And then it already starts again in the 16th, 17th century that there are early forerunners of art dealers. And this intensifies, especially in the so in the 19th and 20th centuries, it really booms because a big market then emerges also thanks to industrialization. Overall prosperity is established so that by now many more people than just the church and only the nobility could afford it, and only a few commoners, with the exception of the Netherlands, which already had it in the 17th century. That one also, of course, needed people to act as intermediaries. And then, of course, for art dealers, the big dream is, as I said, to make good money, but also to discover artists who will become something special. And many are also proud when they manage to get a work of an artist they have engaged into a famous museum.
Yes.
That so that's basically a bridging of sorts. It is currently becoming more difficult.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to address now. The change in the art market, the dying off of galleries. Would you like to say something about that?
Especially in the last years since Corona, it was, of course, a setback, because we have to imagine that for 2 to 3 years, depending on the situation, almost nothing was possible. Also, and with artworks, it's like this. You have to see artworks in the original if possible. You can't just send them digitally. And that means we can imagine that many simply couldn't survive for 2 or 3 years, and that there was a significant dying out. But we are also entering a new time that represents changes, that makes it even more difficult to continue trading art on this scale. Or that's why some auctions are also dying out, many galleries are collapsing, and the art market is just a market, and the objects of a market are always connected with supply and demand. And the supply is actually always increasing, because we also have an increasing percentage of artists, which is actually also a recognition showing that art holds a high value. However, on the other hand, because there are so many, it is naturally also more difficult serve them all, sell them, but also simultaneously categorize them.
Yes.
because as in Zen, as I said, then coincidences happen. So I really, even when I was sometimes really almost in the desert or in the steppe or the tundra or in rural areas that are very sparsely populated, suddenly there can be a painter who is excellent,
Yeah.
but he, if he is not already famous and cannot afford to live in such areas, will never become known, you know. And others who are in these centers, the big centers are, of course, New York, London, Paris, Berlin a bit, but not in comparison. And then the new ones, which are still often completely forgotten, that's Hong Kong, that's Beijing. Then there are all the growing cities of Southeast Asia. Singapore is also making a strong effort to engage with art, and it is additionally a changing market. And but it is changing, but it is still, so to speak, closed.
Yes, for us. Yes, because
For us, yes. Yes, because as I said, we are already occupied, I believe, with still trying to categorize our own art, so to speak.
isn't it the same for everyone? Isn't it also like that for them with their own?
Of course, they naturally have. Let's take China, for example. It has its own domestic market. If we imagine it, there are 1.4 billion
Yes.
people living there. And we can say half of them are doing very well. So 700 million are simply well off. And in some cases, we must also see better than us.
Okay.
And they have this need to catch up, to devote more to art again, so to speak. And art has a very high status there. That means when artworks are created in China, they hardly ever leave because they are absorbed within this domestic market.
Yes.
And conversely, depending on the situation, they also have different categories there. They have traditional painting, then they have modern painting, and then they also have, like us, abstract and all sorts of things. And depending on the situation, they also understand too little, which is logical. And as mentioned, it hasn't quite settled yet because that's not the case yet. From their side, it's the opposite, because there are also, like in Japan, many exhibitions on Western art. And that's why they know more about us than we do, so to speak, about their artists.
I would like to know more about price formation in the art market. How does it form? I know that in Germany, for example, there is a sort of ranking. Tell me how the prices in the art market, how they develop.
Yes, it develops. It always depends on the artists, but so to speak, you often say you've invested such and such amount of time, and then the size of the paintings and so on. And that's a kind of basic value, which, however, depending on, then partially also overestimated, because you must factor in that the artist wants something. The gallerist must, first of all, cover the costs, and of course also make a living from it, meaning also earn something to be able to live from it, and ideally live very well. That's why a work can already cost a priori a few hundred to a few thousand francs, depending. Then, of course, it continues with the level of fame he has. What criteria play a role there? Has he already had solo exhibitions, or was he only in group exhibitions?
Did he study? Was he a master student?
Then important, if they are, of course, well known, if they are master students of German artists, and that is, let's say, proportional, one could say, in German-speaking countries we have in relation with the Americans in the Western world. The majority of artists who are highly regarded. So Germany has an incredible number of them.
Germany does a few things quite well, building cars, artists, breeding horses.
Yes, and the art is really so truly great artists. And then, of course, it is like this. If one is, let's say, a master student of Mio Rauch, for example, from Leipzig, I know such cases. I know one whose father, who was also an artist, who always, he wasn't bad. and he always had to survive and therefore had to work on the side, and then also worked at our museum, so to speak, to survive. Then his son became a master student, and then everything was basically 5 figures.
Cool. Good for him. Yes.
And the father just said, hopefully this doesn't completely spoil him now. And hopefully he doesn't fall down so much, depending on what can happen, that even a well-known artist suddenly somehow ends up on the sidelines again. So you can see that such things, of course, also play an important role. Then if there were exhibitions, yes, where were the exhibitions? Were they in big cities, in well-known cities? Then it has more value than if it was in small places, which doesn't change the quality at all, depending on how the work is. But those are the kind of rankings that happen.
Yes, the word is factor.
And then, of course, the wish for every artist is first to have a solo exhibition, if possible, then if possible in a well-known city, if possible in well-known galleries, if possible in a museum.
Exactly.
And then in a famous museum. And all of that plays into the potential sale. But it must be said, it is still always about supply and demand. So if the demand is very strong, and it develops depending on the gallery owners or the museum directors or the art critics, it can change significantly. And depending on that, a piece can then become very expensive or very cheap. And one can say, usually I would say, let's say the 20 best artists that you find, so to speak, on the screen digitally are also generally really good. So if you are bad, then you still have no chance.
Would you trust yourself if you drive to an art academy and look at the works there? Let's say all the master students, there's always a few. Do you think you could tell from the paintings who will become famous and sell for high prices?
No, I wouldn't, because as I said, all these factors come into play, and you can never be completely sure, because you might know the supply, but the demand...
Yes, always remains an unknown factor, yes.
That remains very unknown, yes. And now in the new digital world, that distinction is becoming increasingly blurred. Sure, one could say if you were in an academy and could see everything, you might consider one thing or another to be better, but there is always a certain subjectivity involved.
Very exciting. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Well, you do know a lot more.
Yes, I'll hold back now. Those are the questions for you.
Yeah.
What makes the art scene tick? Everything we've always wanted to know about art. A podcast by and with Petra Lossen.